Sometimes I like to talk to you about things that make me laugh. And today I thought we'd look at the quality of local elected officials and the bollocks they spend your money on. I know that you don't perhaps think that's funny, and it isn't funny if you're a resident, but it's an example of how appalling the quality of our elected people are. And really, I think as we all get more political and as Britain begins to wake up, because I really think you're beginning to wake up, well, it's time now to look around you, because the old blokes that sit on the parish council and do not much damage except to hanging baskets have been replaced by wannabe entrepreneurs and people who think they're great giant magnets of industry. And they're not. They're the kind of people who use whiteout on their pumps in the garden in the summer, right? These people should not be anywhere near budgets the size of the budgets they have. And as the Labour government looks more and more about devolving even more power to these lunatics, you need to know what's happening behind the scenes. Do you? Do you know what your extra council tax is being spent on? Because these guys didn't. And today, I'm going to sell you a bridge. The example I want to talk to you about today is Thurrock Council. Now, Thurrock is a perfectly normal, average area, right? Sits on the north bank of the Thames. It's east of London, and it's full of things like ports, logistics, lakeside shopping, a commuter belt, lots of green spaces, has about 176,000 people there. There's lots of business and work for people to involve themselves in. And actually, they are a really hard-working area. Big mix altogether. And what those people really wanted were just good services for their area. In fact, that's what they voted for when they elected the Tories, because, I mean, they're really good with money, aren't they? No, they're not. And the story starts back in 2016 when green energy was just beginning to be heavily championed. We'd signed the Climate Act about, 6 years before, and it was now becoming the buzzword. Of course, now it's changed our entire lives, but then it really was seen as a bit of a money-making opportunity. And Thurrock Council, they were determined to push this fourth industrial revolution and be seen as heroes of the planet and the revolution. And this hapless band of idealists and wannabe entrepreneurs jumped in with your money. 2016, right up until 2020, Thurrock Council, unbeknown to its residents, borrowed huge sums of money and invested them in renewable energy bonds. So how did that even come about? Well, I picture it like, a random email turns up at Thurrock Council and is read and believed. Do you know, picture this, right? A bit like Nigerian lottery winner emails. That's kind of how I picture it. Anyway, Thurrock, instead of going, oh, look, I've got another Nigerian lottery winning email. Oh no, they took it deadly seriously. And Thurrock's finance team were eventually pitched a fantastic sounding deal in a plush office in Mayfair. Yeah, you can rent those by the hour. Really should have thought it through. Anyway, they didn't think it through. And in the end, they would invest in private renewable energy bonds arranged by a slick salesman called Liam Kavanagh into his company called Rockfire. Now, private bonds, I'll try and explain this. They're not like stock market bonds. They're more like a private investment where you've got some spare money, you're going to invest it in a private business. And now normally you would also get shares out of that company. But instead of getting shares, they just got their money back plus a profit line. Bit like interest, right? Anyway, Slick Liam promised up to 6% a year in returns. And it was all backed by his company that had rolled up 53 solar farms, right? So the council finance team that thought that this sounded completely brilliant, and also why only use their own money when they could get a fantastic loan for exactly this sort of thing from national government at a really good discounted price, right? So they could buy Rockfire arranged loan notes and they could pay for them with national government money, and the bit in between would be extra profit for them and they could spend it on services. Now, Rockfire, the company, didn't actually cold call or email any residents. They just presented to councils, Thurrock, Warrington, Newham, and any Treasury offices as part of a professional investment pitch in that rented office in Mayfair. That's how the relationship started. And this bloke on his own was so convincing that over the next 2 years that Thurrock kept loaning, eventually much of it ended up in this 53-site portfolio under his company umbrella. But that was okay, right? Because they were saving the planet. So on paper, this looked like a good investment because it had stable assets. How did they know? It had long-term cash flows because his spreadsheet said so, right? But do we know if anyone ever visited these sites? Did they count the solar panels in these 53 solar farms? Because in reality, if you're going to invest all of your money, you're probably not going to do it in one concentrated area, right? You tend to spread it a little bit because even a little oversight and perhaps some independent valuations would have stopped this pain happening completely. He took all of this money into his business that ended up being nearly £1 billion of taxpayers' money. And it led to a fabulous lifestyle of complete luxury. You know, diamond-encrusted watches, 25-screen TVs. And anyway, Thurrock then found out, and they also claimed, that he had managed to get himself about £150 million off their money. And that had been able to pay for things like his personal £13.7 million yacht and a private Bombardier jet that cost 9.1 million and a 232-acre private country estate with no solar panels on it, by the way. And he bought a pad in the sun in Mallorca for a total bargain of 3 million. So Slick Liam was a terribly wealthy man. Now, he denied any wrongdoing, obviously. Let's think about where it all could have gone wrong. Well, the idiots at Thurrock ended up borrowing money from other councils to invest in the private solar company, who all expected monthly payments back. And of course, when they didn't get that money back, the financial geniuses at Thurrock had nowhere else to go but borrow from other councils. And it got so bad that they borrowed for just 1 or 3 months from a council and used that money to pay someone else back. So the classic rob Peter to pay Paul type shuffle. Borrow from Council A to repay Council B.
And speaking of money, how about the $20 you owe me?
Oh, yeah? Well, I only got 10, so here's 10, I owe you 10.
Thanks.
Hey, Mo, you owe me 20.
Well, here's 10, and I'll owe you 10.
You owe me 20.
Here's 10, I owe you 10.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Good, now we're all even.
Whilst you just pray that the solar farm loan notes pay up on time. Obviously, anyway, they didn't. And it was found out that 150 local authorities had ended up loaning money to Thurrock. And the constant refinancing was the only way that the numbers looked like Thurrock had balanced the books. In any private business of mine that I've owned or I have run, this would never have balanced the books. It would always have been shown as unbalanced, right? And then, of course, there was total carnage because reporters started digging into council finances, and they ran these massive spreadsheets, and it showed an anomaly. It showed that Thurrock were borrowing millions. In fact, that they'd borrowed £1 billion from more than 150 councils. Right. Now, you would think here that before a bloody journalist found this out, somebody, somewhere at national government would be keeping tabs on councils. But nobody had noticed. That's how appalling the situation is. And there was no one at Thurrock going to mention anything, right? Oh no, they all had their heads right down. Thurrock wouldn't even explain where the money was going at all. Eventually, these journalists issued a freedom of information, and Thurrock still stonewalled. So they were taken to a tribunal and lost, and it was only then that the scale of the solar farm betting racket began to surface. Anyway, the journalists kept digging for a few more years, and they published piece after piece in the newspapers. And only after all these stories were published did anyone from national government get involved and tell Thurrock to stop borrowing. And they told the other councils to stop lending to Thurrock, right? And that, of course, created an even bigger problem. Because Thurrock couldn't spin the money anymore, and they had to wait for the money to come in, oops, the house of cards came falling down. But there was worse news to come, because the company holding the 53 solar farms had an asset hiccup, meaning that the value they had sold the council of these solar farms wasn't even close. The subsidiaries, therefore, coming in from government and payments from energy companies and other tax-funded grants didn't add up to the figure he had promised. Now, remember this. Thurrock Council borrowed taxpayers' money to invest in an already taxpayer-propped-up risky investment. So we've all got a double hit, right? Well, Thurrock residents had a double hit. We've just got the hit once. Anyway, all it meant, of course, was that there were no returns at all on those loans that Thurrock had given them. The money wasn't coming in. The real cash was never going to come in. And then Slick Liam's holding company went bust and entered administration in 2022. And a month or so later, so did Thurrock, issuing a Section 114 bankruptcy in plain English. And then, of course, they got hit with the bills from the consultants, the commissioners, who charged them huge amounts of money just to even review the balance sheet. Another cost that you residents had to pick up, soz. After that collapse, of course, Thurrock went to the High Court against Slick Liam and his company Rockfire. But it was only in June 2025 that the Serious Fraud Office bothered to open a criminal investigation into Rockfire investments at all. They've sent legal demands to banks for information, and it's a live case involving serious fraud. So there are no findings yet, and probably we shouldn't discuss any more about that. So everything I've told you is in the newspapers and the public domain already. The best bits I can't tell you about. So what happened to the council in charge then? Because surely these complete idiots had to have faced something. Well, no, they just resigned and the finance director was professionally reprimanded. But there were no criminal findings found against council members or officers, because in this country, it is not criminal to just be really stupid and incompetent. So really, only the residents have been financially punished. And now they have government administrators embedded in the council. Not that they'll be any better, but anyway. And they have a new Labour authority that have had no choice but to impose huge increases in council tax and huge cuts to services, including children's services. Administrators for the solar farm company sold it off for about 700 million, but that meant that Thurrock had a massive hole of at least £200 million that all had to be paid for by local residents who had no idea in the first place that the council had decided to literally gamble all its money. Let's go back to an earlier thought. Labour want to give councils more devolution, allowing them to make more and more of their own decisions with your money. But Thurrock isn't the only council who's filed for bankruptcy. There are many more, and many closer to filing for bankruptcy. Residents' money all over the country is being spaffed up the wall into insane private deals no real businessman in their right mind would gamble on, from paying over the odds for a hotel. I mean, imagine a hotel price is 25 million and the council pays 30 million. Oh, and they also forgot to do an asbestos check, which you normally get done on the survey. So the whole project ended up costing at least £20 million more and also went into administration. Hello, Croydon. And then thousands and thousands of pounds a year spent on taxis. You've got some councils allowing staff to work from beaches in foreign countries. And even this week, we've learned of fraud in a London council renting social houses to what? Friends and family? I don't know. Live case. No idea. Just read that in the newspaper. But that happens whilst genuine residents are on waiting lists. They're sofa surfing, bringing up their kids in B&B accommodation. And then there's the council who decided to knock down their building and build a brand new building. And they installed gold taps. The only losers ever are the British taxpayer. The takeaway, people, is that if you don't get involved in politics, you'll be governed by idiots. And that's what we all need to do now. I know it's carnage at national level. I know it's carnage at global level. And if you watch my videos, you know that we are being dictated to by outsiders we never voted for. But you can start. Reform has started, but you can help. Ask for your council's budget. Start asking questions. Oh yeah, be careful though, because there are a few councils who've started putting harassment clauses on people who write them letters, not even joking. But we must do it en masse. We must find out what our councils are doing, because it's our money and we haven't got much left. Anyway, what do you think? Did I sell you the bridge? It was a good scam though, right? It was a good scam. Send me your comments, like, subscribe. Let's do it again. Might do Keir Starmer next time. I wonder if I'll get done for harassment.